David, it is so good to see you.
Good to see you, Jerry.
Great. Thank you so much for your time in getting this video organized. We're so grateful here at Puʻulu Lapaʻau, which is the Hawaii Program for Health Professionals. I'm Jerry Young, the executive director, and Dr. David John was our chairman of the board for a long, long time and did so much for this organization and providers in this state, as well as practicing full time rheumatology for multiple decades here in Hawaii. So, David, thank you so much for making yourself available and telling us, being willing to tell us your story about physician well being and all those kind of details. Thank you. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Jerry. First of all, it's an honor to have been asked. Thank you so much. And I was approximately 10 years the chair of the board there, and my heart is still there. So to be able to participate like this is very valuable to me. Thank you. Yesterday, I watched Dr. Cunningham's speech, and if anybody gets a chance to look at Dr. Cunningham's video as well, I was in awe of her and of her strength, her courage. And I tried to look back and see if I was as awesome as Dr. Cunningham. I don't think so, but I will tell you a little bit about myself and a little bit about my time with Puʻulu Lapaʻau. Um, it's hard for me not to sort of sound like I'm at an A meeting telling my story because that's sort of what I've always done. But I will try to morph it a little bit. Basically, I grew up in Kansas City, and as a little boy, I lived in a very tense home, and so I learned to escape my reality at a very young age. Um, I was a daydreamer. I failed kindergarten because I was a daydreamer and wouldn't pay attention. And then I learned how to read, and I lost myself in books. And and then in high school, I learned about drugs and alcohol, and I found a new way to learn to lose myself. And I didn't understand what my problem was that I was like this. And when I was in college, I walked through the psych section of a bookstore, and I saw this book called The Emotional Incest Syndrome. And I picked it up and I leafed through it and I bought it and I read it and I realized that was my problem with my mother, that we had an emotionally incestuous relationship, which I was uncomfortable with, and but she needed because she was so miserable. And so it was sort of, and it was right about the time I needed to stop partying so hard because I'd gotten accepted into a 6 year BAMD program. And at 17, I was provisionally in medical school. At 17, I left home too. And so I was supporting myself, working on Saturday and Sunday nights and going to medical school. And it was crazy. I didn't sleep, but I had a wonderful time. And when I didn't drink much. I never really liked the drugs. I only did it because my dad was in Vice, a police officer, and he was a Vice guy, and so he was trying to bust drug people. So I did drugs under his nose, but I didn't really enjoy it. I just liked alcohol, and but I didn't party too often because I was school and work. But when I did, I always overdid it. Even then, I overdid it. So as an intern, I matched with the University of Hawaii, and I went to Hawaii for planning to stay 1 year, which ended up being 40, and it should have maybe longer. But anyway, I halfway through my internship year, I had a nosebleed, and it was bad, and I was hospitalized. And my ENT said, "You have a tumor up there. I want to take off your face," and I said no. And so we argued about it for the whole week. I laid in this hospital bed thinking at 24 I was dying, and I agreed to let him go up through my nasopharynx and biopsy it. It was a benign hemangioma and happy ending. So, but it made me go off the deep end because I thought I've been a good boy, working, being a good intern, no fun. And I went, and the next 6 months in Waikiki, I tore up Waikiki and almost got kicked out of my internship because of not showing up for call after a Fleetwood Mac concert. I couldn't find my car, and so. But then I met my wife, who was much more straight arrow than me, and I was in love, and I cleaned it up a second time, and then for 10 years of a good marriage, then it started to crumble, and I couldn't deal with it. I couldn't deal with our stress. I had two little girls, an 80-hour week job, and a wife who was mad at me, and I started drinking again, and I started drinking more and more and more and more until the last maybe 6 to 9 months of my drinking career, I was putting away most of two bottles of fifths of scotch every night and going to work the next day. And I was a zombie. I was an automaton. I was dying. I wanted to die. And but on Father's Day, 1997, I was drunk and physically abusive to my older daughter for the first time. Me, Mr. Soft spoken, wouldn't hurt a fly kind of a guy. I was in a drunken rage because she talked back to me, and I had my moment of clarity. And she started crying, and I started crying, and I realized I'd become my father, and that was not acceptable. So I I called a friend of mine who was in recovery in Kona, and I called him up and said, "Can I come talk to you?" And he said, "Yeah." So I flew to Kona, spent the day with him. He told me his story, and he told me the the place that worked for him. And I went back to Honolulu, and I booked a flight. And I told my nurses that I was an alcoholic, and none of them could believe it. I can't believe they didn't smell it on me after the way I was drinking. And then I told my ex-wife, and she was pretty nonchalant about the whole thing. And so anyway, I went to Talbot Recovery in Atlanta on 7/7/97 and signed myself into an acute psychiatric hospital. And when I did, I felt this huge weight leave me. It's over. It's over. Because I didn't know I could relapse. I thought I was done. It was over, and in rehab, I learned that most people relapse, and so I lost that sense of confidence that it was over soon. But I was ready to do anything to keep me away, doing that to my daughters. That's why I went to rehab, to save them from me. And Talbot kept me 5 months. They wanted to keep me even longer. They didn't think I could stay sober, and most average is 3 months. And so, and it's a kind of an amazing story how they let me go. And a large part of it was because my buddy in Kona called them and said, "You got to let this guy come home. We'll take care of him. You got to let him come home." And uh, I had to find a sponsor from Atlanta before they'd let me go home. So I called up one of my patients who I knew was in recovery, and I said, "Jim, would you be my temporary sponsor? I need to find somebody, or they won't let me come back to Hawaii." And he said, "Yeah, what's your birthday?" And I said, 7/7/97. He goes, "My birthday is 7/7/77. I think I'm supposed to be your sponsor." So anyway, he was my first sponsor and took good care of me. And I came back. I also had to agree to go into a halfway house. So I had this big house on the hill and two Mercedes in the driveway, and I was staying in a $300 a month, sharing a room with ice addicts, and I was happy there. I didn't mind the centipedes and the cockroaches. I was away from the trauma, and I was happy there. But I would still drive up to my house, which was 10 minutes away, and uh, fix dinner for my kids, eat dinner with them, and then go to an 8 o'clock AA meeting, and then go sleep in my $300 a month place for 4 months. I stayed there, and then I went home, but it didn't work. And almost to the hour, 1 year later, Father's Day again, something really bad happened, and I realized it was either my marriage or my sobriety. So I told my ex-wife I was divorcing her, and I did, and I gave it all up. And in doing that, I saved almost everything. thinking I was giving it all. I saved it. And I didn't know. I just knew that I was going to drink. And I had had all this support. And I just I just didn't want to drink. And so I moved out and started uh, being a single guy. But the girls stayed with me most of the time, and it was we were happy. And then um, I was being monitored by Puʻulu Lapaʻau ever since I came back, dropping urines once a week and going to meetings every night, at least one, often taking my children with me to meetings where children could go. And um, I I really did everything that they told me. I was willing to do anything to stay sober because I knew that one drink and I'd finish off that bottle of cognac in an hour, And so um, I was the model recovery person, I think, for Pu'ulapa'au. So much so that they asked me if I wanted to be on the board, and I said, "Well, you're still monitoring me." And they said, "If we let you go 6 months early," so I got I got off probation 6 months early, and I became a board member of Pu'ulapa'au. And after 4.5 years of sobriety, and then I was very active on the board. It was 12-step work for me, and me helping other people really helped me. I had sponsees. I was very involved in Alcoholics Anonymous, which I still feel saved my life. And then there was a shakeup in the Pu'ulapa'au structure, and ends up after all the smoke cleared, I was the chair, and I was the chair for much of the next 10 years. I worked with amazing people. I worked with amazing uh, addiction psychiatry executive directors and fellow board members, and I worked with amazing clients. I worked with physicians and other healthcare professionals that were wonderful people, but they came to us angry and scared and confused. And one of our jobs is to control the environment as best we could for them in early recovery till they could think clearly, but also to help them with those problems, the anger and the fear. There's more than one time, and I'm a very soft spoken guy. There's more than one time one of our clients was screaming at me, and I was taking it because I could see why he was screaming at me. And anyway, it was very, very rewarding to work with those people, and most of them made it. Most of them had sobriety at 5 years, and which made all of the struggles for the other board members, I'm sure, and myself, worth it. We didn't take federal or state money. We formed other forms of support that worked really well, and nobody was allowed into our books to look at our clients' medical records, which, if that had changed, I don't think I would have dared uh, present myself to Puʻulu Lapaʻau. So, anyway, there was some interesting times in our organization, but not so much because of me, but because of the other people on the board and my executive director and medical director, the board, the Puʻulu Lapaʻau grew and it flourished and it evolved into a much stronger and broader scoped organization. I'm very proud of it. And I would go be invited to visit other institutions, Hazelden, Betty Ford, places like that, and they were all very impressive, but they weren't Pu'u Lapaʻau. And I think that has to do a lot with our Hawaii spirit and the special way we deal with people. So I was chair for a long time, and I would have. It's probably good that what happened that I stepped down because having any kind of a leader too long, things get stale. So, but I was recruited to become a professor at a medical school, at my alma mater back in Kansas City, and I I'd gone home to do some personal things for my family, and it happened to be reunion week, and I went to the reunion at the last second. The dean asked me, "Why don't you come back and be a professor here?" I said, "No way, I'm not leaving Hawaii ever." But they offered me something I eventually had to say yes to. And I went there. I was a professor for 8 years, and I wore lots of hats. Uh, and one of them was a teaching in the humanities division, literature and medicine and body image in medicine. And in those classes, one in the literature and medicine, we read A Long Day's Journey into Night about, um, and I showed the movie where Katharine Hepburn slides into opium addiction or morphine addiction. And then we did all kinds of things that had to do with the subject of addiction, because I know that 1 out of 10 of my students was going to become an addict. And if they didn't become an addict themselves, they would have family members, patients, associates, somebody else that it would touch their lives. So, and I remember how ignorant I was of my own disease, that I assumed that they were too, for the most part. And so I did a lot of teaching about the subject of addiction, among other things, when I wasn't teaching rheumatology or doing this or doing that. And I had an amazing 8 years. But a year ago, I retired from the medical school. And I just didn't want to work 7 days a week anymore at age 70. And that's what I was doing. I went to Missouri to try to work less, but it was more. And it was always on. And so I miss my students. In fact, I have 4 letters of recommendation to do for internships. They still won't leave me alone. And I just loved my students and that role. And I was meant to do that. So as a as something I didn't mention, a year after I came back from and I decided I was couldn't stay in my marriage. The next Wednesday at an AA meeting, this cute guy had been hitting on me, and I kept saying, I'm married," and then I mentioned that I was getting a divorce, and I was with Tom for 3.5 years, and so I had to come out as a gay man into the Honolulu community. So I was causing all kinds of gossip fodder there for a while, and I had to stay sober, and I had to hold my head up through all of that, and I managed to do that because of the support I had from Puʻulu Lapaʻau, from my loved ones, and from AA. So one of the things I did at the medical school was I was the faculty sponsor for the Gay Straight Alliance. I also would 2 or 3 times a year have a medical student knock on my door and usually in tears ask if they could talk to me about their problem because they knew about me. I've not been in the closet about anything because my worst character defect was emotional dishonesty. And when I got clean and sober, I never wanted to lie again about anything because I had done it my whole life on an emotional level. I didn't steal, I didn't do that kind of stuff. I was worse because I hurt people with my dishonesty. So I am painfully honest now. Not cruel, but painfully honest. And I expected my conservative Missouri medical school to accept me the way I was, and they did. And I accepted, and I just didn't hide anything. And therefore, I was able to help those young kids who were struggling with one addiction or another, and they knew somewhere to go. I'm so glad I was able to do that. And so I've been involved with that kind of 12-step work to even to today. I'm involved with a recovery group here in Kansas City, and it's just gonna part of my soul now to be like that for the rest of my life. I used to think that at some point when I was getting old and near death, I would buy a great single malt scotch and just finish it off that way. And I realized, no, I don't want that legacy. I want to die sober. I want people to know that I died sober. So um, I am so one of the things I'm most proud of. I won't talk much longer, but one of the things I'm most proud of is my time at Puʻulu Lapaʻau because we impacted a few hundred lives, most of them successfully, almost all of them successfully, and even the ones who we failed on we failed on that time. But there was always the next time. You just don't give up. I was really lucky. I never had to relapse. So when I signed in to that acute psychiatric hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, and thinking it was over, I was right. For me, it was over until today. It has been over. Tomorrow, I don't know. But today, I'm sober. I had 28 years on July 7th. Uh, One of the reasons I retired was after 25 years of being single and swearing never, ever, ever to let myself be that vulnerable again. I met a man who changed that. So I've been married 2 years to Ricardo, and I have. That's kind of going full circle for me to trust that much again, and that is probably the last phase of getting well for me. So we all have different stories. We all have different paths, but so many of them are surrounded by dishonesty and shame and secrets. And I made people be honest when I was chair. I made people face their shame because what's more shameful, to say I'm an alcoholic or to get shit faced at a party and everybody see you on the floor? What is more shameful? And no, I'm proud to be an alcoholic. When I first got sober, and the old timers would say I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic, I would, well, I'm not sure I'm ever going to be grateful for this, because a lot of people were hurt by my disease, particularly my daughters. But now I am a grateful recovering alcoholic, and my I'm a better dad. I'm a better doctor. I'm a better friend. I'm a better husband. I wish I had known then what I know now. Maybe things would have been a little bit different, but um, I am grateful. I do have to tell one more story before I get off about the magic of my recovery. The week of graduation at Talbot, there was Thursday night was Romp and Stomp, where the new people would stand up and say what their drug of choice was, and we would boo or cheer, and the people graduating would get up on stage and have a little ceremony. And since I was senior addict, I got to run Puʻulu Lapaʻau's Romp and Stomp the night of my graduation. But on Tuesday, they told me they weren't going to let me do it, and on that's when Steve got on the phone. And Wednesday, they said, well, we'll let you go back, but you can't practice for 6 months. We don't think you'll make it. And if you come back sober in 6 months, we'll let you go back to work. And I said, thank you. I'm going home. Because it was December, and I hadn't been allowed to talk to my children in 3 months, and I was going home. And so then Thursday, they called me back into the office again and said, we're going to let you graduate. So I had picked Amazing Grace by Judy Collins to play as the backdrop from my fellow speech. And so when I played Amazing Grace by Judy Collins, there weren't many dry eyes among the faculty, the other people there. It was very touching because they were all my buddies by then. So I went home. About 7 or 8 years later, Justice Steve Levinson and his wife invited me to a Judy Collins concert at Mamiya Theater. We were like in the third row. Her encore was Amazing Grace. I started crying. And Steve and Judy were looking at me like, Steve and Kathy were looking at me like, what's wrong? Because I was crying. And Judy Collins looked at me. She saw I was in the third row, center, and she looked at me. And I looked back, and she knew. She was speaking to me. So, anyway, those things will happen to you if you stay clean and sober. It's wonderful. And now I'm still doing outreach rheumatology clinics 10 days a month in rural communities, and still interfacing with my students on the sly, and learning how to be a part-time house husband, and life is good. And like I said, I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic.